Thank you, everyone who is joining us now. My name is Lori Bavaca. I'm an oncology dietitian, and I'm presenting to you live from Cancer Wellness Center. I share this every time. This is my new favorite program. It's called Ask the Dietitian, and it's not because you're asking me, the dietitian, questions, but really it's because I think most of what I do here at Cancer Wellness Center is answer the great questions that our participants have and help clarify a lot of the myths and misperceptions that they might have about the relationship between diet, nutrition, and cancer. And it really is my pleasure to be able to give them trustworthy advice so that at the end of the day, they can be confident that they're making the best decisions about the food that they're putting into their body. So our program, Ask the Dietitian, runs once a month. However, every once in a while, we have such a good topic. It's so popular that there are too many questions to answer in just one session. So for August, this is our second session for Ask the Dietitian. So if you happen to miss the first one, have no fear. You can go to our YouTube channel. You can even subscribe to our YouTube channel because the content from the first Ask the Dietitian was recorded and is available for you there. But when you subscribe, you get a lot of other additional content really at your fingertips. So it's a really great resource for you to consider as well. Now, the way we run this program is I share my screen and I will present to you a PowerPoint that includes the remaining questions from our Ask the Dietitian for August. And then those of you who registered, you will get access to these slides because it will be sent to you. And then I also include some recipes and different ways to apply this information. And if you are joining us live on Facebook, thank you for watching. Okay, so I will now share my screen and present the remaining portion of Ask the Dietitian for August. As I mentioned, our topic was so popular. Oops, hang on one second. We're going to do that again. Our topic was so popular that we had so many questions. I had to do it twice. So we're talking about digestive health and really how can the foods that we eat help impact our digestive health. So we're going to start with the remaining questions. The best remedies for digestive issues, like I could probably spend hours talking about this, right? So I really just condensed my best answer for this question in one slide because I wasn't sure specifically what this question was trying to address. So what I do want to point out is that food and lifestyle and medicine is integrative, right? So sometimes if there are digestive concerns, it's very important for that person to be medically evaluated, right? There may be some interventions medically that need to be done. There may be prescription medications or over-the-counter products that need to be required as part of management. And then diet and nutrition can help complement that. So if someone is nauseous, I would recommend some bland choices, and that's what a dietitian can help do one-on-one in a meeting. But there's been some great research about ginger. And specifically ginger extract in the amount of 0.5 grams per day. Now, you may find some other ginger products on the market, or you might be savvy enough in the kitchen to take some ginger root and make some ginger tea for yourself, or put that ginger in a smoothie. Lots of great applications. And again, that's where a dietitian can help. Sometimes people I work with are nauseous because something they smelled triggered their nausea. So that's always an important concept to troubleshoot. Then we have diarrhea. So we talked about this, I believe, a little bit earlier in the first segment of Ask the Dietitian. But for diarrhea, we want to think about foods that we can eat, right? Because we want to maintain nourishment. And so we always focus on sources of soluble fiber. Another word for that is viscous fiber. And what that does is it helps slow the gut down and add some bulk to the stool. So we focus specifically on incorporating bananas, oats, rice, potatoes, and even applesauce, and then expanding upon those limited food choices so that someone can stay adequately nourished. Constipation, we certainly have spoken about in the first segment. Constipation, I love this 3-step approach of a hot beverage, a hot cereal, and a high fiber food every single day. So to get sort of in that rhythm and on that routine, especially first thing in the morning, to have a cup of hot tea or hot coffee or even hot water, have a bowl of hot cereal, and then later in the day include a high fiber choice, like something from flaxseed that includes flax seeds, nuts, seeds, berries, and raw vegetables. We want to consume a lot of liquids when we're adding fiber to our diet so that our gut can tolerate that fiber. And then also for gas and bloating, I think it's important to think not only what we're eating, but how we eat. So we want to slow down the pace of our eating and maybe eat in a mindful way. Gradually adding more fiber and drinking plenty of fluids. As I mentioned, most Americans are not eating enough fiber. So in the effort to improve diet, we eat lots of fiber. Well, we could get the consequences of some gas and bloating. So what's helpful for that is more fluids at the same time. And sometimes we explore digestive enzymes that are either prescribed or are on the market, and they can be helpful in addressing gas and bloating. So hopefully these remedies are what this question was trying to ask. We're going to move on to the next one. Can certain foods improve digestive health? That's a great question. So I thought, the best takeaway from this would be, if you were to ask the experts or ask like a group of dietitians, what would be on their list in terms of the top foods for gut health? And so I have to add my favorite topic is fiber. And we know that high fiber foods help maintain bowel regularity and also help to support the microbiota or the microorganisms that reside in our gut, specifically the colon. And so, as I shared, most Americans do not eat enough fiber. Survey after survey shows only 1 in 10 of us achieve the recommended amounts. So we may want to start to gradually add a little bit more fiber day in and day out with lots more fluids in order to help support the function of our gut. I think I have to include fermented foods because they are a way for us to consume the beneficial microorganisms that can function inside our gut once they land there and help the gut do what it needs to do. Polyphenols, these are found in certain foods. I'm going to review them next, but they can be a source of fuel for microorganisms. And so in turn, when those microorganisms are supported, they're going to benefit our body in systemic ways by lowering inflammation. And we also see that when we fuel our microorganisms, that it can help repair some damaged cells systemically. That's a good thing. And then lastly, omega-3 fats. So Americans also are probably deficient in omega-3 fats, and we can all benefit from including some more of them in our diet. They are beneficial in terms of maintaining the lining and the integrity of our GI tract. So where can we eat these foods? I'm going to give you my list. So fiber, I love the addition of beans and lentils. Again, I think it's an underrated food and not many Americans are consuming them regularly. Adding some berries, especially raspberries, are surprisingly high in fiber. And then leafy greens or some other fresh vegetables, adding them regularly or even one by one will be a great way to increase the fiber in your diet. So prebiotics specifically, I do want to talk about, they fuel our microbiota. So prebiotics are a type of fiber. Now, not all fibers are prebiotic, but all prebiotics are a type of fiber. I know that's confusing, but I don't want you to get the two are not mutually exclusive. So we know specific prebiotics in the foods that are listed there, like asparagus, banana, garlic, onion, dandelion greens, and jicama. The microbiota that reside in our gut really enjoy eating them. And we don't actually use those prebiotics, but the microorganisms do. It's kind of cool. So they feel nice and nourished, and they are functioning at their optimal levels. And then fermented foods I mentioned earlier, so they give us a source of live microorganisms. We can find them in cultured dairy and then dairy alternatives that are cultured, as well as kombucha, kefir, fresh kimchi, and fresh sauerkraut. When we enjoy them regularly, we're kind of giving ourselves a healthy dose of those beneficial microorganisms. And then polyphenols, remember, they help to really ultimately lower inflammation in the body. We find them high in berries, cruciferous vegetables, lots of different spices, green tea, and then whole soy foods. And then lastly, those omega-3 fats, maybe you've heard of them. They are highest in some of our fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. And enjoying them a couple times a week are what the experts recommend. Or regularly, meaning I would say almost every day, we can enjoy the plant versions of omega-3 fats, and that's from walnuts and flax seeds and even flaxseed oil. Okay, next question. This one's a good one. How much fluid? Actually, we have two questions here. That's how great it is. How much fluid is optimal to stay hydrated during the hot weather? Do we need to increase it during the summer versus the winter? Really interesting question. So I'm going to do my best to answer this in a way that's helpful. So here's what we know about hydration. We know that it's critical, right? We need fluids, especially water, because it's so involved in every single aspect of our health and wellness. So literally enough water can help to protect our organs and tissues. It carries nutrients to our cells. It regulates body temperature. That last one's a big one, right? Super important for us. Now, the general recommendation is for females to consume 11 cups of fluid per day and 16 cups of fluid per day for men. Now, do keep in mind, we do get fluid not only from our beverages, but also from food. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Fluid needs depend on a lot of different things, right? And that's where a dietitian might be able to help, or a healthcare provider that you know and trust. So some of the variables that influence how much fluid we need include our body size, our age, our activity level, the climate we live in, and also the other foods that we're eating. Are they high in water or not? Or are we eating a lot of fiber? That can all influence how much fluid we need. Older adults may need to be particularly careful to make sure that they're getting enough fluids, because as we age, we tend to decrease our sense of thirst. It's not as reliable as it once was. And at the same time, as we age, we don't concentrate our urine as well. So therefore, we do need to pay attention to how much fluid we need as we age, especially. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that. So you can ask yourself this question, or maybe you have, am I hydrated? Am I dehydrated? What's happening here, right? So for most of us, generally speaking, if we're thirsty, then we need to drink something. And that's something reliable to let us know that we're getting the adequate amount of hydration in our diet. Now, if we experience any of these symptoms, which are sort of vague, but these especially if it's a cluster of these symptoms, then we likely are dehydrated. So that includes dry lips, dry mouth or tongue, if we have a headache, if we're feeling dizzy or lightheaded, if we have fatigue or are lethargic, if we're lacking the ability to focus, if we have muscle weakness or muscle cramps, and especially rapid breathing. These are all potentially troublesome symptoms, right? So we probably want to reach out to a healthcare provider if we're feeling this way. Now, sometimes it's helpful for individuals to use this criteria in order to determine whether or not they're adequately hydrated. And we call it the WHAT criteria. And so we're going to talk about that now. So the WHAT criteria. So W in WHAT stands for weight. And if we lose 1 or 2 pounds overnight, that's a sign that we've lost a lot of fluid and we need more fluid, right? The U in WHAT, or sorry, T, this is in the wrong order, we're going backwards, but the T in WHAT stands for thirst. And if we're thirsty, that's indicative of dehydration, right? The U stands for urine color. And the more concentrated our urine color, especially if it becomes something like apple juice in color, the more likely we are dehydrated. So the more of these criteria within the WHAT, the more likely we are dehydrated, right? If we have one of them, chances are we might be dehydrated, but as soon as we have 2 or even 3 of them, we are dehydrated. Okay, so some people will use these as reliable indicators of whether or not they're hydrated. Hopefully I explained that okay, but it's a really helpful tool. So what about, okay, so let's get to that question, right? What about warm and cool weather? How does that influence our hydration needs? So during hot weather, chances are we do need to increase our fluid intake, but especially if we notice our body temperature increases, because remember, that's the point of fluid and water. It helps to regulate body temperature. So if our temperature increases, then we need more fluid. And if the weather outside is causing that to happen, then yes, we need more fluid. It's just like when someone has a fever, that person needs more fluid. If we're outside and enjoying a hike, for example, because we're attending a Cancer Wellness Center event, we might notice we're perspiring. So that's a loss of fluid that we need to then replace. Okay, so that's how the weather in warmer climates influences hydration status. Those two variables mean we need more water. If you happen to stay indoors in warm weather and you're not raising your body temperature or you're not perspiring, then chances are you don't require any more fluid. As the temperature begins to drop, this is an interesting point. We may not feel as though we need the same amount of fluids as we did in warmer weather, right? And it's a perception, right? Because maybe we're not perspiring as much or we're not as thirsty. I think that's fascinating. But we're constantly losing fluids. When we sweat, when we urinate, even when we breathe out, if we're practicing some meditation, so respiration, we're losing fluids that way. Okay, so we might still use that what criteria to determine in cold weather if we're adequately hydrated. So our daily fluid needs are typically met by a combination of foods consumed and the beverages that we drink. So food basically makes up 20% of the fluid that most of us take in. Isn't that interesting? And then 80% comes from liquids. So maybe that's something new you learned today. It's not only the liquids that we drink that hydrate us, but the food does as well. And I think especially in the summer, some of the foods we eat. So there are foods that are high in water content, and the ones I listed here on the slide have more than 90%. Some of them are up to 99% water. Imagine how they serve to hydrate us as well. And interesting, some of these are seasonal, right? So tomatoes and cucumbers and the berries and watermelon, zucchini, squash, we see them come out this time of year, and perhaps that's satisfying a need that we have for more fluids during this time. So the bottom line on hydration, most of us need more than 2 liters per day. The amount increases if our body temperature rises or if we lose fluid, whether because we're sweating or perspiring, or if we have a GI loss. So if we're nauseous and vomiting or we have diarrhea, we need to compensate for the fluid that we just lost by drinking more. Both food and fluids can help to meet our hydration needs, and using the what criteria can help us determine if we are hydrated regardless of what the temperature is. I love this question. Okay, next one. Is steak okay when you're on chemo? I love this question. And so it's a two-parter. Also, I've heard a lot about fasting before chemo, and this person's asking my thoughts on that. So steak and red meat, here's what we do know. There are valuable nutrients inside steak and red meat, including protein, especially during chemo. That's important, especially if someone is not eating as well during chemo. It could be a valuable source of some vitamins and minerals, including B12, zinc, as well as iron. So experts do advise that we sort of limit our red meat intake. We don't have to avoid it, but we eat about 12 to 18 ounces of cooked red meat per week as part of a total healthy diet. I would say this is a good guideline to follow if you're not nutritionally compromised. So if you're nourished, if you're eating like normal, good guideline to follow. If you're not, and you're potentially malnourished because of treatment, this guideline may change because the priority is to obtain nutrition, right? And to prevent malnutrition. A total healthy diet supplies a variety of different foods that saturate our body with the necessary nutrients. So while I appreciate this question asking about steak specifically, I do think it's important to recognize how much of all the foods that you are enjoying and how that matters for your nutrition status, especially during treatment. We do encourage that individuals on treatment balance meals from protein that include protein from both animal and plant sources. And so we also incorporate quality carbohydrates like whole grains, vegetables, and fruit, and then some quality fats, especially from plant foods like avocado, nuts, and seeds, as well as some of our plant oils. So let's go into fasting and chemo. I probably could speak hours on this subject as well. We're a little early in our research, so there's a lot of interest and information that you might come across. But what I'm presenting to you is really preliminary. So we need a little bit more time to learn a little bit more about fasting. So depending on who you ask, you might get a different answer what a fast is. So in the purposes of chemo and the research, really what they're looking at is a range of anywhere from 24 hours long in terms of a fast up to 6 days. And sometimes zero food is consumed and just fluids. Sometimes it's a lower calorie diet combined with time restricted eating. So eating really just during a window of time during the day, and eating a lower calorie diet because that can mimic a fast, which is really interesting. What our preclinical studies have shown is that if someone is fasting, it may lower inflammation, it may reduce angiogenesis, and that's when a tumor creates its own blood supply, making blood vessels. And fasting may also lower insulin-like growth factor, which is a really great thing because high levels of insulin-like growth factor promote the carcinogenic process. Fasting may also improve insulin sensitivity. So you don't only see it being explored in the setting of cancer and chemotherapy, but also in other disease states, such as diabetes. What we do know from clinical data is that fasting around chemo has been linked with fewer treatment-related side effects. However, fasting is not without risk. So we do know that there are potential side effects like hunger, which is not a fun feeling, malnutrition, and a big concern is the potential loss of muscle mass. So really my takeaway for you is that if you're wishing to pursue fasting, to first get an okay, right? Make sure your treating physician or any healthcare provider that you know and trust gives you the okay to use this approach, and certainly that you get your hand held alongside a dietitian because he or she can really make sure that you're maintaining your long-term nutrition status and not becoming compromised. Really great question. Okay, so this individual is asking, I need suggestions on 6 small meals versus 3 large. Good question. So in my work clinically, we might recommend small frequent meals for people during treatment because it helps manage some of these GI symptoms, including nausea, stomach upset, or feeling full too quickly. So this can help us address those side effects and maintain nourishment during treatment. There really is no set standard, right? It doesn't have to be 6 meals. I don't even think it needs to be 5. It's just eating every couple of hours really seems to help address those symptoms and optimize nutrition status. I would say the way to go about this is think about what you normally do, right? We don't have to make drastic changes because that's really challenging to sustain, right? So think about what you normally do and could you adjust that? So if you are already eating 2-3 meals a day, just think about adding 2 or 3 quality snacks alongside your regular meal pattern. Or what some people do is they take their regular meal pattern and they just eat half of it or a third of it, and then they save the rest for their next meal in just a few hours later. Hopefully that I'm explaining that okay. Just in case you want some more specific, definitive guidance on this, I will include a handout for those of you who registered that really is a template for small frequent meals. Okay. Think this is the last question, and this is a great one to end on. How to get adequate nutrients after treatment. It's a real issue for someone with a bowel cancer. Great question. So how to eat enough nutrients? I'm only giving this slide summary in an attempt to answer the question, but I think working with a dietitian again is one way to make sure we evaluate what someone is eating or not eating, and then compensate where we need to, or address any potential clinical deficiency with a medical review. But if we're going to try to eat enough nutrients, which is a good idea for everybody, I would say where we find most of our nutrients in terms of vitamins and minerals are in our fruit and vegetables. Maybe you know that already. So 5 or 10, why not push that number up to 10 a day if you possibly can? And some of our greatest sources in terms of nutrients come from these bright colored, dark colored fruit and vegetables. So especially the green, red, orange, and then the yellow colored ones. They're just concentrated. There's lots of different vitamins and minerals inside those choices. If that's a challenge, again, because this person suggested that it is with bowel cancers, I like the idea of maybe incorporating them in a way that's modified in terms of texture so that it's easier to digest. So it could be something like a smoothie or a soup that provides those servings in a way, in a package that's easier to digest, right? And sometimes it's a little bit of trial and error. By the way, I don't know if anyone has seen the news, but the Center for Disease Control has released its #1 vegetable in terms of nutrient content. And I have an image there on the slide. I'll give it away in a moment. So the other way to make sure you're eating enough nutrients is to make sure you're eating enough protein, especially if you're in that window post-treatment where your protein requirements might still be a little bit high. It is important to focus on protein coming from eggs, fish, poultry, from dairy, and the alternatives that also have a significant amount of protein. And then whole soy foods can give us some protein. And then some whole grains. So great examples are oats, quinoa, brown rice, whole grain breakfast cereals, even farro. The list goes on and on. I think you get my point, but these are really important sources of carbohydrates that are vital for our body to function, and also great source of fiber. So that may help in gut healing, especially for someone with some bowel cancer. I wonder what that vegetable could be. I have a feeling someone guessed who is joining us, but I will tell you it's watercress. So if you haven't seen or tried watercress, now you know. It might be really packed with nutrition. This is according to the CDC's criteria. It is high in a lot of vitamins and minerals. It's really potent, nice and peppery and delicate, as you can see from the leaves there. And so a little bit goes a long way. And a lot of times I would just recommend someone add it to something that they might already be eating, like eggs or scrambled tofu in the morning, maybe on top of their soup or salad or sandwich. It's really delightful, but it packs a punch in terms of nutrients and flavor. So these are the resources that I wanted to share. We talked a lot in the first segment about FODMAP and IBS. So there's a lot of great websites that are, again, reliable and trustworthy. Dietitian content is curated on there. So you'll see the links there for some additional helpful suggestions. The NIH has a great website all about how the digestive system works. So if you're just curious to see that for yourself. And then also too, that from the NIH, keeping your gut in check. So a little bit of troubleshooting some of the digestive concerns that we have in this Ask the Dietitian. This is further content for you to really keep yourself informed. Now, I like to almost always include recipes, right, in my Ask the Dietitian. So these kind of consider digestive health. So when we talk about fiber, beans are a great way to bring your diet closer to meeting your fiber goals. I love the idea of this miso cauliflower. Miso's great flavor, but gives us some probiotics as well. Spaghetti squash, more fiber, high in water content, and then a nutrient-rich stir fry. So if you make a stir fry, think about all the different veggies you throw in there, right? And it's a really great way to make sure you're eating enough nutrients in that day. And then you can add your protein alongside it, and then that quality carbohydrate that I discussed. So it might be a great option for you to consider. Okay, so our next Ask the Dietitian is scheduled for Friday, September 8th at our usual time. And our topic is all about dining out. So how can we dine out in ways that are cancer protective? So we encourage you to submit your questions and hopefully have another informative Ask the Dietitian session. Thank you so much for joining us.